little bit like what we should do.
Okay, let's start all over. What is your question? What is your question?
Okay, so first I thought we had a paper to do, but I think you were saying that it's like
I will
that and
announce it at the end of this week. I will announce it at the end of this week. Saturday or Sunday, I will announce it.
I'm sorry?
I will announce the paper on Saturday or Sunday, but go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I was asking, what are we supposed to be doing for the paper? And like,
Very
how much
good.
pages is it?
All right, very simple. That question has been raised at the beginning of the semester. Maybe I'm confusing two things, but that question has been raised, and I will answer it as many times as the question is raised. What you have is not really a paper. It's a project, but it's not really a paper. Okay. What you have is what is called an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography, which is just a listing of readings of articles, presentations on a subject. Now, for this particular class, what I am requesting is that you pick a narrow topic. Do not pick a topic that says war on drugs, and you read papers and then annotate them and say you have done this project. I will really mark you down. You get less than 60 points out of 100. Okay.
So you're saying we're not supposed to do what?
Do not say pick a topic, a very narrow topic. Okay.
You didn't give us topics to choose from, right? You didn't give us.
I gave you examples of topics, but you're free to pick your own.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you're free to pick your own. But pick a very narrow topic from what you have been doing. For example, you can take a topic like the life and times of Sigmund Freud. Okay. You can take a topic like the growing and processing of opium in Afghanistan. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, you can take a topic like the ancient source of opium, something like that. Okay. Just pick a topic like that, the life and times of Pablo Escobar. Okay.
Okay. How much pages is it supposed to be?
Okay. So let us say you take a topic like the origins of the Medellin cartel. The origins of the Medellin cartel, which might look at the original persons that formed the Medellin cartel. Have some of their leaders passed on? How did they pass on? What were their leaders doing? How did they do what they were doing? You can take any approach you like. But what you ought to do is identify 7 articles on that narrow topic. 7 articles. Are you hearing me? Hello? Whoever is asking this question, are you listening? Are you paying attention? Okay, let me continue whether or not you're paying attention.
No, I'm hearing what you're saying, Professor.
Okay. Pick 7 articles on this. Say the origins of the Medellin cartel, the origins of the Cali cartel. Okay, you can even compare the Cali cartel to the Medellin. Okay, and their origins.
Yeah.
Who started it? How? What kind of life were they living before they started this? How did they operate? So when you pick 7 articles, what you do then is each article, you summarize each article in 1 page.
Okay.
Now, before you summarize, before you provide a summary, you should cite that article. For example, John Johnson, the childhood lifestyle of Pablo Escobar. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it's published in the Journal of Drug Violence, 1989, June. Pages so and so. You have to do that citation. And then you summarize the article. Okay? So now, after you summarize all 7 articles, then you should write an integrative summary, which like ties all the 7 articles together. So those 7 articles that you tie together then must have a theme. It could be the violent methods of the leader, or how the leader was somebody from a very poor and violent neighborhood, and this is how they saw they could become rich.
Oh,
And
okay.
so you write an integrative summary. That integrative summary should be about 2 or 3 pages long. So you're now looking at 9 to 10 pages. You follow me so far?
Yes, Professor.
Okay. This integrative summary should come before the summaries of each individual article, because I want to see what you are writing about. Then I want to see whether the articles you wrote, the summaries you have selected tie into the summary that you have described for me. All right? So the integrative summary, which comes first, then the 7 separate summaries, and then at the end of it all, I want a 1-page listing of the 7 articles, listed like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the 7 articles I read.
Yeah.
It makes sense now?
Yeah, I'm getting what you're saying.
Okay, so you're looking at anywhere between 10 and 11 pages. And that would be that.
Okay.
Good evening,
Thank you.
Professor.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am very, very fine.
I would
right.
just like to know whether or not this annotated bibliography will be for MLA format or APA format.
Choose any format you like.
Any format? Okay.
Choose any
Thank you so
format.
much.
Okay. Choose any format you like. All right, so we're going to begin. Today is going to be very short, but it's going to be very short, but it will really provide you some guidance as to how you should approach the discussions and the questions, as well as the way the final exam is going to be structured. The final exam is going to be an essay exam, but I'm going to link every question to the theoretical foundations of this class, okay? All right. Before I actually share a screen where I'm going to actually pose a question as an illustration and answer that question, it's from your discussion, so feel free to go back and add to your discussion, change what you have. If you have not graded it, I could reopen it. Now, at some point in this class, we talked about analytical perspectives, okay? That is to say, what are the perspectives from which people see the war on drugs? What are the different approaches, the different theoretical, ideological approaches that you can see the war on drugs, and also that you can see the use and abuse of drugs? You can see the addiction to drugs. In what way do people look at it? From what perspective, from what philosophical perspective do people look at the use of drugs and why there is a war on drugs? Now, there is no doubt, there is absolutely no doubt that these illicit drugs, the two we're talking about, and all other drugs, you know, all other addictive drugs, they do a lot of harm. And this is why there's a war on them, okay? Now, we talked about things like cigarettes, and tobacco, and alcohol. Tobacco is an addictive drug. Let's be honest about it. It is deadly, okay? But it is not psychoactive. I'm not aware of anybody that smokes cigarettes that lose their mind and attack people, okay? But when people smoke marijuana, marijuana is a psychoactive drug, okay? And people can get addicted to it, but it is not something that people use regularly. Now, But marijuana, when you smoke it, it has smoke, it has tar, it has bitumen in it, because essentially you are burning something and letting the smoke settle in your system. So it can do as much harm as a cigarette does, in as much as it will also create a psychoactive change of the mind. Okay. Now, something like alcohol is a psychoactive drug that changes people's minds. And it affects the way people think, it affects people's behavior. So it's psychoactive and it's addictive. But if you consume alcohol in moderation, you can actually just consume it for the enjoyment of it, and it will not do any harm. Okay, but it is potentially psychoactive. It's potentially harmful in that way. Okay, and people, as you well know, there are people who are drunkards, there are people who are alcoholics, and they take it and they go crazy. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. But we are focusing on this. What do you call it? Alcohol is not illicit. It's allowed, but it's controlled. Cigarettes are not illicit. They're allowed and they're controlled. Marijuana is illicit, but recently the government is beginning to at least let go on controlling marijuana so stringently. Okay. Even though I don't agree that you need to smoke marijuana for its medical benefits, but marijuana does have medical uses, just like opium has medical uses and it's still used. I mean, you extract opium and you have morphine out of it, and the morphine is used as anesthesia. When you go to hospital, you have to go for surgery, and somebody injects morphine inside you, and then you go to sleep. They cut you up, you wake up, and you go your way. Okay, it's kind of refined. Okay, nobody gets addicted because of it, because they go to surgery and wake up. Okay, so the same way cocaine, there's still some of it that is still used, the coca leaf. Okay, and you get painkillers out of it and what have you. All right, so even what do you call it? Opium, you get codeine out of it, which is a painkiller, which is the way it was used from the ancient world as a painkiller. All right, so but people who abuse drugs, people who use drugs, this cocaine and opium. So what are the three perspectives from which you can look at them? Okay. There is what you call the deviance theory, okay? The deviance approach, okay? And I'm going to apply all of it. The deviance approach comes out of a particular theoretical perspective, which is what you call the realistic theory of politics. So we are looking at deviance and political realism, okay? And political realism is such that the idea of political realism is that when there's an interaction between two constituencies, one attempts to dominate. And the whole idea between any kind of interaction between any two constituencies is for the domination of one. And each side trying to work towards strictly its advantage to the disadvantage of the other side. Whatever we have to do to become more powerful, then let's do it, okay? Because it is to our advantage. It's applied in international trade, okay? So deviants, therefore, are people in any society. There are norms of behavior. There are standards of behavior. Deviants are people who deviate from those norms, and they are to be blamed for their behavior because they are lazy. Because they are lazy, they want to take drugs because they want to forget their problems, at least for the time being. Now, rational theorists who are liberals believe that people do things for their own interest. People who use drugs, they use them as recreation. Okay, it's not because they are deviant, because it's an enjoyment. This is number one. Number two, they cannot find solutions to their problems. And so they take drugs and they forget their problems momentarily. But their intention is not to go and harm anybody. Nevertheless, when they take them, they can pass out and they don't go to work, they're not productive. Nevertheless, it's a solution for them, okay? Then of course, there is the historical materialism perspective, which is to say that people who take drugs, and this is where a lot of students have misunderstood the historical materialism. Historical materialism is based on Marxist theory, which is that society is divided into classes. There is the working class, and then there is the capitalist class. And the capitalist class exploits the working class. The working class feels alienated from the process of production, because the working class produces a lot of surplus, and this surplus is appropriated by the exploiting class, by the capitalist class, to create more capital. And by creating more capital, they control the instruments of production and distribution to the detriment of the working class. And that alienation from the production process is what caused people to use drugs so as to forget their problems. Okay, so how does it apply to some of the questions that we raised? I'm going to, now, these three perspectives also influence the way people think about the solution to the drug problem, okay? Now, if you believe in the deviance approach, if you adhere to the deviance theory, then drug users should be put in jail, they should be punished, and when you go to the sources of supply, their approach to the supply to the control of supply will be to go to South America, go to the sources of drugs, destroy the crops, install governments that engage the suppliers, the producers in battle, in violent confrontations, and destroy their crops, and one way or another. If you take the liberal approach now looks at the suppliers of the producers, those who cultivate, the peasants that cultivate these crops. These crops yield them more money. They don't have alternatives. So from a rational point of view, this is, you think about if you go and work for 10 hours a day, whatever will yield you more income for 10 hours of work is what you're gonna do. So that is rational because you want to have resources to feed yourself, feed your family, and be able to wake up the next day and go to work. So rationally, if cultivating opium, if cultivating coca is what gives you your income, then that's what you're gonna do. And so the liberals will say, no, go and help them, these peasants, cultivate alternative crops. And in international trade, what we should do is we should also provide them a demand for it. So we can import their goods, their legitimate goods, and they can make an income. So that is the rational approach. The historical materialist, the Marxist approach, is simply saying that all of this is nonsense. There's no way that the capitalists will take over whatever you want to produce. What if you try to say, get the South American to produce cocoa instead of coca? Then the capitalist is going to take over the production of the cocoa because they have the capital and they're going to pay the working class people very low wages, which will now alienate them from the production process. And by alienating them from the production process, by paying them low wages, by exploiting them economically, they're still going to revert to drugs. And they might then produce the illicit drugs on the side. So you're not gonna help the situation. The best solution then is to overthrow the capitalist class, destroy the capitalist class so that you don't have this greedy capital accumulation class that will make your propositions of no use. This is what the historical materialist will argue. So having said that, let's look at a discussion question. Let me see if I can share screen. Okay, all right. All right, here is a question, okay? And once we answer these questions, then I'll ask you if you have other questions for me based on the class topics, and then we can take it from there, all right? Now, we talked about the groups that gained and supported, that gained from and supported the trade in opium. Of course, the British, the Indians, and some Chinese officials, Indians, the Parsis of India, they gained from it. The British, they sold opium in China. That we know. Now, as you are well aware, we discussed last time that the Chinese tried to stop the importation of opium into China. And yet it persisted. It persisted through a British company that was operating between Britain, India, and China. So how do we apply the realistic theory here? How do we apply the realistic theory here? Now, remember when the Chinese attempted to prohibit the importation of opium to China, what happened? The British declared war. Now, in economic theory and in historical economic theory, we have the realistic theory. The British intervenes in trade so that their company that operates in China will be able to export opium to China. They derived a lot of revenue from it. It made England rich, okay, because they would buy opium from Afghanistan and sell the opium to China. The Chinese will pay them in gold, then they will use the gold to import tea and textiles from India and then keep the surplus. So here, they are making sure that the British are economically powerful, that the British dominate the Chinese in trade and become rich in the process of doing it. Now, the ruling classes of any society want to be able to maintain their power. By selling opium to China, what does it do to the Chinese? The Chinese working class, the Chinese middle class become weak, they are not productive, and so the Chinese ruling class, whether they are capitalists or whatever, will become weak because they are not able to stand up to the British ruling class. So they become poor as a ruling class, and the British become rich as a ruling class. And so it was not in the interest of the Chinese, even the Chinese realists who believe in their own power base, to allow the British realists who believe in their own power base to dominate over the Chinese realists, the Chinese ruling class. They don't want that. Now, so we ask the question, compare the persistence of the export of opium to China and the persistence of the export of opium to United States. How do you compare it? When the Chinese prohibited opium importation, in order to sustain the power of the Chinese ruling class, the reason that the opium export to China persisted is that there was a demand for it in China. This is number one. There was a demand for it in China. And so the export persisted. And there was Chinese people also in their ruling classes who benefited from it. And so they took bribes. And so that's their own internal struggle. But the persistence also was workable because the British had the military power to compel the Chinese to continue to import it. All right. Now, how about the persistence of the export of opium into the United States? Okay. The persistence of importation of opium into the United States is also because of what? Because there is a demand for it. If there's nobody buying opium or morphine to sniff and to get high, nobody will be importing it into the United States. So this is why the persistence on both sides, because there is demand for it. All right. Now, in what way could you say that the methods are the same as in China, as in USA today? Well, the methods are the same because the importers of opium into the United States are doing what? They are fighting against law enforcement. In every way, they are using guns, they're paying bribes, and they're using guns even against US law enforcement. They're using guns within their own markets, within and among each other, to force their way in. The big difference is that the violence that is being perpetrated today is not sponsored by the governments of the countries that export this opium. You don't hear that the Mexican army is attacking the United States to force Americans to continue to buy opium or coca or cocaine, okay? But in the case of the Chinese, way back then, the British government used its army. Essentially, the army was embattled by the companies, the British companies that were exporting the opium. And they used military force, government-sanctioned official military force. It was a government foreign policy to compel the Chinese. So the difference is that in China, it was official government military force. In today, it is not the official government military force of Afghanistan. It is not the official military force of Mexico. Nevertheless, they are fighting against law enforcement here, okay? And now, why is it that Afghanistan and Mexico are not using military force? So can somebody answer that question to me? Hello? Can somebody answer that question to me? Are you guys still there? Sherry Joseph, what do you have to say?
I'm sorry, Professor, do you call me?
Yeah, I called you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to do my assignment at the same time. What was your question?
The question is, why is it that the method of forcing the illicit drugs into China are different from the methods of forcing the illicit drugs into the United States? How come that the Mexico and Afghanistan are not using military force to force the American government to allow illicit drugs, when in China, the British use military force?
Okay. I would say the reason for that is the British had more of a reason, I would say, to force it.
Why was it a good reason for them to say the Chinese, you must buy this? Otherwise, they came with their gunboats and declared war on China.
Well,
why did they have a better reason then than now?
Well, one, I guess they were trying to create this balance of trade because there was an imbalance at first, or there was some sort of imbalance where they were importing more Chinese goods than the Chinese was actually purchasing. So
why couldn't they just modify their exchange rates? So Latiana president.
Well, no, they couldn't.
Why is it that Afghanistan and Mexico are not using military force?
because one, China did not want it. They made it very clear that they weren't.
I know, but the British use military force, and that's official government military force. So I'm asking Latiana, is that Latinia?
Latanya.
Oh, Latania. Oh, thank you for helping me out. So Latania, why is it that the Mexicans and the Afghans are not using military force to say, Americans, you are trying to inhibit trade. We have a balance of payments deficit with you. And because you will not allow trade, and then they come with their army to force Americans to force the American government to allow the shipment of opium and cocaine.
Can you repeat the last part? You said it so fast.
Okay. Why is it that the Afghans and the Mexicans do not bring their army to compel the American government to allow the free importation of cocaine and opium into America? The British felt like, hey, wait a minute, this is all about trade. And so you must allow us to allow your people to buy opium. If not, they declared war in 1839 and 1869. And they forced the Chinese government to allow the importation of opium into China. So, because of course there was a demand for it. But today, there's still a demand for opium and cocaine in America. The importers are, fighting against law enforcement. They are compelling, they're forcing their way in and able to sell it in America. But the method of force is different. The Afghan and the Mexican government are not bringing their armies to the borders of America. Why not?
Oh, can I take another stab at it, Professor? This is Cherry again.
Okay, so Latanya, you didn't
I-
have something to say to us?
Oh, shoot, go ahead.
Let's try Latanya again.
I would say because this government make a lot of money off of the drugs also with like medications.
How does that prevent the Mexican government and the Afghan government from bringing their army to the borders? And simply say, hey, wait a minute.
I don't think I understand your question. Sherry, can you answer it
Yeah.
so maybe I can understand
Let
what
me
you're
see.
asking?
Okay, Sherry, go
I'll-
ahead.
I would say it because the British Army felt that they're superior than that of the Chinese maybe at that time, and that they could overpower them and somehow bully them. The same way if the Mexican and Afghan, they can't bully American, military forces because we're far superior. Would that be the answer?
That is realistic theory. Plain and
Okay.
simple. That is realism. That's political realism.
Okay.
If you go to theory of political power, that is what realism is about. Realism is about might is right. If I have the military force, I can dominate you. There's nothing wrong with that. The Afghans and the Mexicans do not have the military force. They just can't. Now think about migration. It's another example of political realism. When Europeans came to the shores of America in the 1600s, in the 17th century, in the 1700s, in the 1800s, what if Native Americans had guns and gunpowder? Do you think that America would be white man's land today? Answer that question.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. It's about guns and gunpowder. It's about if you have the military force, you become a conqueror. If you don't, you are not a conqueror. The difference in the persistence of the importation of opium in China at that time and the United States today, first is one, there's still the demand for it. Okay, and each of the two governments, the Chinese at that time and the Americans and the Western world today, And the Western world today is simply that there's a demand for it. But then in the 1800s, the British had a superior military force, and so they simply compelled the Chinese to let the borders be open. And so today, the Mexicans and the Afghans do not have the military force to do it. Talk about migration, like I said, if the Native Americans had guns and gunpowder, there's no way America will be a white man's land. Now, they might still migrate, but the place will still be under the control of the Native Americans. Just because after about the same time, they came on the African continent. African continent today is not white man's land. I mean, they can have poor government, they can have corrupt governments, they may not be as well developed, but the place is not a European country because the Africans had the military force to be able to keep the Europeans at bay. I mean, they took a lot of people, as slaves and brought them to America, but that was about all they could do. To come in and eventually take the place, they colonized it, and after a while, they had to leave. So try to then understand the basis of realism, the basis of liberalism, and what you call rational theory, and the basis of Marxism and historical materialism. All right, so that's all I have for you for today. So does anybody have any questions? All right, hearing none.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What is the finals gonna be like?
The final is going to be a bunch of essay questions, and they're going to ask you to link the answers to these theories I'm talking about. They're going to ask you to link answers to, say, supply side approaches, demand side approaches, the deviance theory, harm reduction, what have you.
Okay.
To add to that question,
Okay.
when you hold the final, is it going to be a timed exam, and do we have a certain time frame to do it? But
Yes, 2 hours.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, it's going to be open for a whole day or 1.5 days, from 6 p.m. today to midnight tomorrow, something like that. And then, but once you start, you have 2 hours to finish the exam.
Okay. Oof. Okay.
All right.
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you, Professor.
Other questions? All right. I'll say good night to everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
question boards for us to
Just this last one.
and what if
Just this last
okay.
one.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right.
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Okay then.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone. Thanks, Professor.
Good night.